I'm Councillor Clive English, the Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this remote meeting of the committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel, and this will include the instant messaging. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? I ask this not to prevent people from doing so, but just so that we will be aware if this is taking place. I don't see any indications, so I will assume not. I will now explain how the meeting will be conducted this evening. My role as chairman will continue. However, the responsibility for managing the meeting has been temporarily assigned to the Democratic and Electoral Services Manager, who I will refer to as the facilitator. This officer will not steer the debate. He will assist in implementing the remote meeting protocols. A Democratic Services Officer is also with us to produce the minutes and to provide procedural advice as may be required. Instead of public speaking, members of the public have been invited to submit written statements, which will be read out by me as chairman, or videos, which will be played in the appropriate speaker slot. We have a number of both this evening. I will provide further explanations as we proceed through the agenda, but members are reminded that instant messaging will be visible to those viewing the meeting and should only be used for raising technical issues, indicating a wish to speak, raising a point of order, or seconding a motion or amendment. I will now ask the facilitator to take the attendance register by reading out the list of committee members in alphabetical order. Members should confirm their attendance by answering present.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Councillor Brindle.
Present.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
Present.
Councillor English.
Present.
Councillor Eaves.
Present.
Councillor Harwood.
Present.
Councillor Kimmins.
Present.
Councillor Munford.
Present.
Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
Present.
Councillor Perry.
Present.
Councillor Spooner.
Present.
Councillor Vizard.
Present.
And Councillor Wilby. Councillor Wilby.
Does not appear to be speaking, but I thought I saw his icon.
He's just unmuted his microphone as well. Councillor Wilby. He's indicated he is present in the instant messaging.
Yeah, thank you very much. I believe that's all members of the committee, but
That is correct.
So no apologies and no substitute members. So we move on. May I ask whether there are any visiting members late registered? I did not believe there were any when my briefing was prepared.
No, there were not, Chairman. Would you like me to read out the officers that are in attendance?
Yes, I'm coming to that shortly. May I, as a result, then go on to officers present and which committee items they will be presenting? Mr. O'Connell.
So we have Rob Jarman, Head of Planning and Development, James Bailey, Development Manager for items 14 and 17, Austin Mackey, Major Projects Manager for items 13 and 15, Adam Reynolds, Senior Planning Officer for item 16. Cheryl Parks is the legal representative. It's myself, Ryan O'Connell, the Democratic Electoral Services Manager as Facilitator, and Debbie Snook, Democratic Services Officer as Clerk. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We proceed then to item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. I believe there are none, but just to be on the safe side, Mr. Bailey, are there any withdrawn items?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We do have a adjourned meeting date penciled in for the 30th of July, but given the relative shortness of this agenda, I hope we will not be needing it. Said optimistically. Item 6, urgent items. I intend to take any verbal updates as urgent items as they will contain further information relating to the applications to be considered at the meeting. Unless anyone indicates to the contrary, I will take that as agreed. Okay, no indications.
Agreed.
Yeah, no need to indicate unless you're objecting. Item 7, disclosures by members and officers. I see that there is at least one disclosure to make. Councillor Spooner, I think that is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to item 15, I wish to disclose that I am a member of Bearsted Parish Council, but I'm not a member of its planning committee. I have played no part in its consideration of the application at item 15, and I intend to speak and vote on that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I look forward to that in due course. Item 8, disclosures of lobbying. The facilitator will ask members of the committee to declare in alphabetical order if they have any disclosures of lobbying. They must answer either no or yes and specify the agenda item or items that have been lobbied on. Mr. O'Connell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
Yes, items 14 and 15.
Thank you. Councillor Brindle. Councillor Brindle.
Sorry, 13, 14 and 15.
Thank you. Councillor Chapeltay.
13, 14, 15 and 16.
Thank you. Councillor English.
13, 14, oh yes, 13, 14, 15 and 16.
Thank you. Councillor Eaves.
Yeah, 13, 14, 15 and 16.
Councillor Harwood.
13 and 14.
Councillor Kimmins.
Sorry, I was on mute. 13, 14, 15 and 16.
Thank you. Councillor Munford.
13, 14 and 15.
Thank you. Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
13, 14, 15, 16.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
13, 14, 15 and 16.
Thank you. Councillor Spooner.
14 and 15.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vizard.
All 4 items.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilby. Councillor Wilby, if you can hear me but you're unable to speak, can you put it in the instant messaging, please?
He is typing a message at the moment. Yeah, all of them. All 4.
Okay, I've registered that for lobbying, Chairman, and we'll see if we can resolve Councillor Wilby's microphone problem in the meantime.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 9, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. There are no such items this evening, therefore I move that all the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed, and unless I see any indications to the contrary, I shall take that as agreed. That is agreed. We move on to item 10, minutes of the meeting of the 25th of June, adjourned to the 2nd of July, which have been duly circulated. If members could indicate if they have any objections to those minutes, otherwise I will ask the committee to assume that they are agreed. I'll give you a second or so. No indications, therefore I will say that the minutes are agreed, and I will sign those in due course, which will take a while as they're extremely long, but very worthwhile. Item 11, I turn now to the Conservative group and ask them for a nomination of one of their members to be political group spokesperson for the rest of the municipal year.
Oh, God.
I know it's a tall order, John.
I do apologise. I haven't even consulted any of my group on this. I'm happy to nominate myself, but I'm not sure I can do that. So I do apologise, Chairman. I really do.
Councillor Perry, I believe you can indeed nominate yourself.
I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do it. If everybody else on my group reads me okay with that, I'll take it on.
I will give a couple of seconds to the rest of the Conservative group to see if there are any objections.
No,
there aren't. In that case, that is done. Thank you very much to all of you on that side of the house.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies again.
No problem. We move on to item 12, presentation of petitions, and I believe there are no petitions this evening.
That is correct.
Thank you very much, members. Moving on. Right, I turn to the committee reports, which will proceed on the following basis. I will read out the agenda item and then refer to the officer who will be presenting the report. After the report has been introduced, I will call out the names of the people who have submitted written statements to be read at the meeting or videos to be played in the appropriate speaker slot. The statements will be read by myself as chairman. If appropriate, which it isn't this evening because we don't have any, would have then had visiting members. I will then advise members of the list I have received by instant messenger of those members of the committee who wish to speak, and then ask if there are any other members who wish to speak. At appropriate points after members have spoken, I will invite officers to respond. After the list of members wishing to speak has been exhausted, I will ask if anyone wishes to come back with more questions or comments. If a member wishes to propose a new motion or amend the current one, I will ask for a seconder with members going for instant messaging or indicating verbally. And the first one to signal will be the seconder. The seconder will be asked if they wish to speak or reserve their right. At the end of the discussion, any amendments having been voted on, I will sum up and the original motion or substantive motion will be put to the vote. I will ask the facilitator to go through the list of members in alphabetical order and ask for them to vote, and it should be a for or against or an abstention. By voting, the member will be confirming that they have been present for the whole debate on that particular item, on which they therefore take an informed decision. If there is no response, either verbally or by IM, it will be assumed that the member is not present. I will have a second or casting vote regardless of whether I have used my first vote. The Democratic Services Officer will be asked to confirm the result of the vote, and I will announce the decision. Unless requested by 3 members of the committee by instant messaging or verbally, the names of those voting for and against a motion or amendment or abstaining from voting will not be entered in the minutes. If a report is for information only, and we do have one of those this evening, and the recommendation has been moved and seconded, I will ask if that is agreed, and if there is no dissent, a name vote will not be taken. At the end of each item, I will ask for a brief pause while those who wish to do so leave the meeting. Therefore, we move on to the first application of the evening, agenda item 13, get this right, and I will call upon Mr. Austin Mackey, Major Projects Manager, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. If you just bear with me whilst I take control of the screen. Can you see the title presentation page now? Has that come up?
Yes, thank you, Austin. I can see
Excellent.
that.
Thank you very much.
Good. Yeah.
Because I can't see it on my monitor, so I don't know whether you do. So
we can see it, yeah.
Good. Item 13, Chair, is the planning and listed building applications for Len House, Maidstone. As per the previous introduction, members are considering the 2 applications separately, but I'm presenting them as one. They are planning and listed building applications for the restoration of Len House for mixed commercial and residential uses, together with 2 new residential buildings to the east. These applications were deferred at the Planning Committee meeting on 2nd of July in order for a number of questions to be addressed. These were the daylighting of the River Len, the design and character of the Mill Street public realm, clarity in terms of the boardwalk, further assessment of the issue of noise having regard to the relationship of the new residential accommodation to established entertainment and food and drink venues in the vicinity, and for members to have further clarity on the full range of conditions that were proposed. As you had a full presentation last time, I won't go through the same presentation again, but I do have the images available if any member wants to refer to them. Very briefly, members will recall that Len House is a significant building dating from the 1930s. It is Grade 2 listed and is a significant heritage asset in itself. It also lies within or adjacent to a number of other heritage assets, including conservation areas, listed buildings and scheduled monuments. The proposals involve the conversion of Len House to commercial and residential uses. Just bear with me, I'll put the laser pointer on for you. You can see on the ground floor the large open workshop area, which will be converted to a food and drink themed venue. At first floor above will be residential apartments fronting the mill pond, with behind car parking and the retention of the original car ramp. Above will be 2 floors of new build residential accommodation, which are set back from the frontage and set below the original roof line in order to reduce their appearance. The new build elements comprise a building fronting Palace Avenue, the design of which is complementary to Len House, and a second new build element to the rear that has a more organic form that reflects the original character of Bank Street and that medieval part of the town. Turning to the reasons for deferral, the first related to the culverted section of the River Len that runs under the eastern part of the site that has most recently been used as a car park. The proposal to daylight this section was removed by the applicant due to viability reasons. At the previous committee, members accepted that it would be an unreasonable burden to expect the applicant to bear the costs of this element, but wanted to investigate the possibility of the land being transferred to the council in order that it could pursue the scheme, with support from possibly Section 106, SIL or grant funding from third parties. Following the committee meeting, the applicant has agreed the principle of transferring the land to the council, together with an £80,000 contribution towards the future daylighting scheme. The £80,000 figure reflects what it would have cost the developer for an alternative landscaping scheme over the area of the Len, so they're effectively transferring that money with the land. The applicant has already prepared a Section 106 unilateral undertaking to confirm the land transfer will take place. We haven't asked for that to be signed yet because we're simply waiting for final advice from the council's property and legal team. But in principle, the undertaking is acceptable and would effectively provide the council with the responsibility for delivering the area. This is an artist's impression, so it isn't a detailed boundary of the Len, but in effect, the land that would be transferred to the council would span between the eastern site boundary over here up to the point where the applicant gains access to the site. So it's the opening of a significant part of the Len that currently runs in a culvert. KCC's ecologist has confirmed that the opening and the daylighting scheme could deliver material ecological benefits. The second question raised by members related to the boardwalk. Firstly, whether it was appropriately safe in terms of public using it, and also the potential impact it may have on the biodiversity conditions within the mill pond that it would sit over. Officers consider this to be an important part of the scheme because it provides pedestrian and cycle access away from the heavily trafficked road edge of Palace Avenue. The scheme demonstrates, you can see here top left, that there's a cantilever projected out from the building itself, so there were no supports going into the pond, and there's a glass balustrade along its entire length that will ensure that users and people sitting on there or walking are perfectly safe. At the western end, adjacent to the public realm, there is a series of steps that could allow public access and appreciation of enhanced biodiversity measures which are planned within the pond itself. Officers consider that the minimal impact of the walkway in terms of overshadowing is overcome by the improved habitat that is proposed within the scheme. In terms of the design of the Mill Street forecourt, the applicants have prepared a further image showing how that area relates to both the main building and the adjacent public realm. Again, officers consider that this would be a vibrant space that would deliver benefits in terms of the vitality of this part of the town centre. It also allows the uses within the building to extend outwards when the weather permits. It's also, if members recall, a heritage benefit in that it seeks, albeit in a different form, to recreate the historic petrol forecourt that once existed until, I suspect, around the 50s. So officers consider that that element is a high quality element of the scheme and delivers both public realm and heritage benefits. The next issue that members questioned was the relationship of the building to the surrounding food and drink and entertainment venues. You can see on this image the new build elements here. You can just see the marquee over the beer garden of the Beer Keller, and then various other town centre food and drink operations that have rooftop activities. As highlighted in the previous presentation, there is a planning principle known as the agent of change, where, as established now in the NPPF, the planning authority has to consider whether, when introducing residential uses to commercial neighbours, there is the potential to adequately mitigate those uses in terms of the potential noise and activity from their neighbouring commercial venues. The neighbouring operators have raised a number of concerns regarding the potential for increased objections from new residents within the development itself, complaining about noise and the impact that might have on, for example, their licensing, their opening hours and their vitality. Officers consider those uses to make an important contribution to the town centre economy, and therefore we don't wish to adversely impact their future trading. Members asked for clarity in terms of when the noise surveys were carried out, because obviously most of these businesses have been in lockdown for the first half of the year. Noise surveys were carried out in December 2019, in the 2 weeks running up to Christmas. Obviously, that is a busy time for such establishments, but a number of operators have emphasised that their open terraces were not necessarily open at that time of year, whilst we know that others were. Officers consider that, having regard to the noise modelling that's been submitted to date, it would be possible to remodel the impact of the non-open uses using the data available from those that were open, or alternatively, as part of submissions pursuant to the condition, we could ask for further surveys to be carried out as part of the mitigation scheme, because these venues are now obviously open. We're recommending a pre-commencement condition that requires a detailed mitigation scheme. The mitigation scheme specifically has to have regard to the late night entertainment venues, and the condition would have to be discharged prior to works commencing. The condition, as I'll detail later, requires that the works are completed before the units are occupied, and importantly, that the sound attenuation is retained in perpetuity. So the final issue was that members asked for the full conditions to be made available to them. Those are now attached to the agenda. I should point out that for some reason the system didn't draw through two standard conditions on the planning permission. Those are the standard time limit and the list of drawings. So we would add those to the list that you already have. I would also like to ask members for delegated approval just to amend the wording of two conditions, number 6 and 26. They specifically refer to the uses that will be permitted within the main areas of the commercial space. Members may be aware that the government have announced changes to the use classes order. So all the references to use classes are changing, some are merging. So what we're asking is that you give us delegated consent just to reword that condition to make sure we've got the current and future use classes referred to in both the condition and actually the description of development. And the noise condition that I referred to earlier is number 23 on pages 15 and 16. And as I indicated, it specifically requires a detailed scheme of mitigation addressing the impact of the noise venues to be agreed prior to the commencement of the new build works, and for those works to be carried out and therefore maintained in perpetuity thereafter. So to summarise, Chair, having regard to this update and the reasons set out within the main report of the 2nd of July, officers consider that this scheme will deliver significant heritage benefits as well as other public benefits such as new housing and enhancement to the viability of the town centre. There are some less than significant impacts upon the host listed building and the setting of other heritage assets, but on balance, it is considered that these are outweighed by the benefits that the scheme delivers. Therefore, with those minor amendments to the wording of the conditions and subject to the applicant signing and delivering an acceptable unilateral undertaking to transfer the River Len culvert to the council, we recommend that both planning permission and listed building consent are granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mackey. We turn very shortly to the speakers this evening on this application. I have Mr. Wilson, an objector with a statement, Mr. Baker, an objector from a local residents association, and Mr. Brett Chaponnel for the applicant, and a video has been submitted for that particular slot. I turn now to the statement submitted by Mr. Wilson. I am writing on behalf of Amelia Estates Limited and Fusion Dining Limited, who operate the Brenchley, Harry's and Madison's respectively. These venues are situated at 91 High Street, Maidstone and 28 to 32 Gabriel's Hill. This places both those venues in very close proximity to the proposed development. We have been operating in Maidstone with multiple venues for over 20 years, and we have extremely deep concerns that the proposed building will inhibit our ability to trade at the level we have been doing for the past few years. Please find listed below the concerns that we have. The Brenchley's boundaries end where the rear building's proposed residences start. At the very end of our boundary, we operate an area in the spring and summer that is open until 1 a.m, selling food and alcohol. This area is a matter of metres away from a number of the proposed rear dwellings. Furthermore, all year round we have a large beer garden with heated seating available again until 1 a.m. This is positioned a few metres up from the prior mentioned area. Both of those outside areas have background music playing until late and a capacity for many people. We have deep concerns that without sufficiently soundproofed accommodation that we will receive complaints from the residents of these buildings which we fear could have an impact on our ability to trade within the confines of our approved licence. Harry's Bar operates until 2 a.m. It has an outside roof terrace which is at the same level as the upper floor of the proposed works. The area holds 150 people and has background music until late or early. The large number of people both in the Brenchley and Harry's Bar create considerable noise through conversation alone. Adjacent to the bar closest to the dwellings, we store our bins. These are frequently being filled by members of staff until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, which includes the emptying of glass waste, which is loud but unavoidable. Moving on from our noise concerns, we are also worried that a multi-storey building being placed where it will affect our customers' enjoyment of an outside area, blocking the sunlight to the beer garden and enclosing the area with invasive residences that overlook our property, remove the current view. Madison's has the addition of a large rooftop bar. This area holds a large number of people and is licensed to play background music until 3 o'clock. We are concerned that we may receive noise complaints from these new dwellings as they are within close proximity to the roof terrace. Furthermore, the waste disposal at the rear of this property until 3 o'clock in the morning creates a large amount of noise, but that's unavoidable. It has recently come to our attention that the noise survey was carried out in December 2019. We find this to be a flawed and invalid test at this time of year. Our beer garden is nowhere near full capacity, and in fact the lower portion of the beer garden is closed completely. The noise recorded is not a true picture of the year-round noise level in the surrounding area. Furthermore, the Moonlight Bar above Madison's was being refurbished at this time and not in operation. This would not have been considered in the test. We would highly recommend that a second sound test be carried out in our summer period when noise is at its highest. Failure to do so will lead to this development being granted on false information. Upon the new noise survey's completion, we request that the developer enter into a Section 106 legal agreement to prevent any changes to noise attenuation works following occupation of the building. In addition to the Section 106, we also request a deed of easement to allow existing noise from the venue to pass over the residential development site. We have had an incredibly hard year with the impact that COVID-19 has had on the hospitality industry, and now we are faced by a development that will reduce our trade by an exceptional level and potentially make our operations impossible, along with all those other nighttime venues on Bank Street. Kind regards. And that was from Mr. Jack Wilson. I turn now to the comments from Mr. Baker and Miss Beddoes of Bank Street residents. Dear committee, we have very serious concern about the plans for Len House, and we object to the scale of the plans for the proposed building to the rear. As can be clearly seen on the plans, the buildings to the rear massively overshadow our property at 84 Bank Street. They are roughly twice the height of our building, and with the proximity, this inevitably causes a huge loss of light and privacy. All of our daylight comes from the end of the building, and that was the primary reason that we purchased our home. The light will be reduced drastically with this development. The plans show a small gap in the buildings to the rear, but the height of the building in the gap is about the same height as ours, negating the intention of lowering them in the first place. The implied notion that this was done as an accommodation is void, as there is a covenant on the land that prevents building over a certain height. In total, there are many windows in the development that would also look directly into our windows. When Len House was last occupied, occupants used to wave at us while we were in our flat, so the existing second floor windows definitely overlook us. Our privacy was invaded as it was. A further 2 stories on Len House means overlooking, and a greater invasion of privacy would be a certainty. From our property, we can see well-established trees and vegetation as we look all around Len House and the surrounding area. These help the visual amenity of the property and of the area. If the proposed works go ahead as planned, we will see nothing but concrete, brick and tarmac. This will have a detrimental effect on the viability of our property as a residential unit and on our own mental health. Regarding noise, all the flats in our block have good quality secondary glazing, often triple glazing. This is insufficient for the noise generated by the local entertainment venues into the early hours. This is contrary to the applicant's statement in the Planning Committee report. We have found that use of such measures can make the effects of sounds worse, as the sound then reverberates throughout the building, having the effect of knocking things off shelves. Opening windows eases this, but then causes a volume increase. Our previously raised concerns about pollution, air quality and traffic still stand and have not been addressed as far as we are aware. This project is an example of large-scale overdevelopment, especially with the height of the rear building and extra stories on Len House. The overshadowing and privacy invasion of many properties is certain. On behalf of the other property owners in our block and ourselves, thank you for listening. That was Mr. Baker and Ms. Beddoes. Now we turn to a video which has been submitted by the applicant, and this relates both to the planning application and to the listed building application. So one Chairman. Video for both.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just confirm when you can see my screen. Yep, excellent. Here you go.
Good evening, councillors. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Classics Estates, the owner of Len House. We are genuinely excited about the proposal which you've been asked to consider this evening and the opportunity of bringing this historic building back into life. Planning for this redevelopment is, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, not been without its challenges, and in particular the listed building, financial viability, biodiversity, renewable energy and long-term sustainable commercial uses, particularly in these very testing times. Notwithstanding this, we are extremely proud to be the custodians of this building and its long-standing motor heritage. And our aim as a local developer is to provide a positive contribution to those who live and work in Maidstone. At the previous planning committee, councillors raised a number of important points in relation to matters such as noise, biodiversity and the daylighting of the River Len. We do acknowledge the importance of balancing and the impact of proposed development with positive net gains where possible, albeit where it's technically and financially viable to do so. We also acknowledge the need for the development to be of a high quality, both in terms of design, materials and placemaking, particularly the publicly accessible spaces. As a direct result of councillors' recent comments, we have been working closely with officers to address the points raised, and in particular the following. First point, noise. Prior to lockdown, we undertook an extensive noise modelling survey for a 2-week period, day and night. As a result of this, we are confident that the proposers will be able to address the concerns of those adjacent commercial uses by way of careful design of acoustic glazing and venting. On the boardwalk, the provision of this is one of the most important parts of the scheme, providing improved accessibility and facilitates the sense of placemaking we're trying to create. The boardwalk will sit at least 1 metre above the river, cancelling from the building, and the final design is still to be agreed, including any necessary ecological mitigation. Regarding the daylighting of the River Len, whilst we understand the desire of the council to open the existing culvert, the costs and uncertainty of delivery is not feasible for us and could risk the delivery of the wider scheme. Notwithstanding this, we have now agreed the commitment to transfer the land to the council as part of a unilateral undertaking, and a draft document has been submitted for your approval. So to conclude, I do hope you feel that we've taken on board your comments and concerns regarding this application and have found the right balance. Even in the current climate, we are fully committed to commencing and delivering this project as soon as possible, and I sincerely hope that you are all able to support us delivering this fantastic project for Maidstone. Thanks once again.
Right, thank you very much. Right, now, so far I have Councillors Harwood, Mumford, Atkinson and Eves wishing to speak. If you also wish to speak, please add your names to the IM. Right, there are no visiting members, of course. So, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood.
Firstly, I would like to thank Austin and the other officers and the applicant in relation to the proposed condition 23, because that does reassure me in terms of the nighttime economy in Bank Street and the future quality of life of the residents if and when this site is redeveloped. So I think that's a step forward, and I've spoken to some kind of experts in this field, and I think it will stack up and it should work. And we do have some redress if there are any problems either side of that equation. Then I come on to the issue around the walkway. I think officers have looked very much at the issue around the overshadowing from the proposed walkway, whereas I think the concern, as was relayed by a number of members of the committee, was much more around disturbance and litter and all of the other issues around introducing people to, if you like, the quiet side of this borough council owned pond. That does still give me some concerns. I mean, as members of the committee and those watching will know, that the bird life on the island and so on, we have nesting swans, there's a lot of mallard chicks on there, ducklings on there at the moment, we've got moorhen chicks. I do worry about the future viability and sustainability, certainly of the wildlife on the site. I think it's inevitable we'll see lighting, which will have a negative impact. We will see noise and disturbance that will have a negative impact. And as I say, we will see litter and so on. I'm a little bit more concerned now when I heard about this glass balustrade, because if anyone knows, when you put glass next to water, when, as they were, I saw 5 Canada geese landing on the mill pond the other day. The trouble is, if there's a glass reflection of the water body, they think they've got a lot more space to land in than they actually have. And I don't know what will come off worse, the glass balustrade or the Canada geese if they go crashing into it. I think I know which. So I think if we are taking this approach, I think it will have to be something along the lines of what we've already got, i.e. railings or something, which won't simply reflect vegetation in the water, and we end up with the various birds and so on splattering into it. I think there's also an aesthetic issue here in that I think a key principle of the original design was the reflection of the Len House in the mill pond, and of course if you introduce a walkway that dissipates that reflection. And I think that the first slide that's showing Len House really does really flag up how important that reflection is. However, we've heard the applicant saying it's a key element. So essentially, if the walkway is going to be a part of it, I think the officers are really going to need to nail down the conditions in relation to any lighting, in relation to what the balustrade is made of, just to ensure that it does minimise any environmental and aesthetic impacts. So that's one issue. The third point is around the section 106 and unilateral undertaking on the land. I mean, from the presentations, it sounds very straightforward that the land will be handed over, and then Maidstone Borough Council in due course will talk to the likes of the Environment Agency and the South East Rivers Trust and others, and we will get this stretch of sadly concreted over river back in as a central focal point of the town. However, when you read the small print, it's a time limited issue in terms of we need to deliver it within a certain time. If we do not deliver it within a certain time, the land goes back to the applicant, and we've lost our opportunity for several generations probably to restore the river to the town centre, which goes against our green and blue strategy, our local plan, and I think all of our wish to not turn our back on the town's rivers and to treat them far more like Canterbury does the Stour or Ashford does the Stour or so on. So that's my concern.
Can I ask you to come to a conclusion, Tony, please?
Yeah. So that's one issue, the timing, and I'd like some reassurance from the officers that we will actually be able to deliver that daylighting and not simply time out. And the other issue is the default, if there is a timeout on delivery of the daylighting, because that talks about going back to the default of a kind of real thing of pumping water out the river into a channel and then back into the river. I don't think that will work. I think it will just fill up with all sorts of things from elvers to rubbish and duckweed, and that pump will very quickly fail, and then we'll have kind of very nutrient-rich eutrophic water just going green in a ditch that will probably get rubbish in there. I think there needs to be a different approach. If we had a clean water pond or something that was properly managed rather than pumping water out, I think it would be technically feasible and would work. So essentially, I think the noise, we've sorted it. However, I think the design issue of the walkway needs some work, and I think the time limit and the default again need some kind of confirmation from the officers that we can overcome those glitches. Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Mr. Jarman now because I believe he wants to address that point in relation to how conditions could be appropriately amended to secure that. Mr. Jarman?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd be grateful if Planning Committee, if they wish to approve both these applications, gave me delegated powers to reflect what Councillor Harwood has been getting at in terms of the parameters of the design of the boardwalk, as it's termed. With regard to the daylighting, of the River Len. Myself and Austin have spoken at length to both the applicant and the agent, and their intention is a straight transfer of land to Maidstone Borough Council through, as the applicant said, through a unilateral undertaking. The idea is that it's not time limited. The idea is it's transferred to us. Obviously, the applicant needs to reserve access to develop the site, but it's transferred to us, and then it's in our gift whether or not to deculvert this part of the River Len or not. But it's like what happened on Sainsbury's. It's like what has happened on many a riverside apartment development. It's a straight transfer. That's the intention anyway.
Thank you. That's much clearer. Austin, you say you need to clarify. You could clarify the agreement. Do you need to add anything, given Mr. Jarman what Jess said?
Chair, what I was going to simply do was identify to members condition number 27, which requires the detailed design of the boardwalk, including balustrades, etc., to be submitted for approval. But we can certainly take on board Councillor Harwood's comments regarding ecology and lighting in terms of materials and design. With regard to littering, of course, we own the mill pond, so we would have enforcement powers over the applicant, but members could consider adding a site estate management condition to be submitted and approved, indicating how they will manage matters such as litter and disturbance. And as Mr. Jarman has pointed out, the agreement requires the council to take the land in a certain period of time, but then gives it as long as it needs to deliver the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Personally, as ward member, I'm quite happy to have delegated powers in relation to those conditions, but given the importance of this issue, I would like to ask you to let that delegation be exercised in consultation with myself and Councillor Harwood.
Absolutely no problem with that at all.
Right. I now turn to Councillor Mumford.
I'll be as quick as I can. The officers need to take some notes as well. When I first saw this at pre-app, I thought it was a good application, not one that you had to shy away from. I think it's going to give positive contribution both in ecological terms and a sense of place. Somewhere in the spiel at the beginning, it said we could secure secondary glazing, and I'm talking about probably the listed building part of it. I don't think that condition 9 actually does that. However, that might be it might be within condition 23, but I need some clarification there. Where condition 29 protects the lighting around the mill pond, I think it should also include the new daylighted area. So when it's talking about lighting under 29, it's pointed out the mill pond, but I think we should also have a mention of the new daylighting area that we propose to do. Condition 15, EV charging with electric vehicles moving at such a pace. I don't mean the speed of build. I
know what you mean.
I think we should be being ambitious and looking for EV charging points for every parking area. You say that you're going to look at the marketing area, which is use of classes. My major problem with this whole development, right at the beginning, is can I call them the national major fast food outlets taking over the bottom part, which you describe as a sort of market food area. I'd like the condition to be worded that we could preclude that kind of element from it. I don't know whether that's possible, whether in fair trade, probably not. The boardwalk, all I've got to say about the boardwalk is please retain it. I'll accept all of Councillor Harwood's comments, railings, whatever you have to do. But if you take that off, it'd be like taking the pointy bits off the char or the gherk out of the gherkin. We need to retain that. It is part of the place setting as far as I'm concerned. The last point was time limit. the next to last point was time limit. I was concerned, but what Mr. Jarman's just said, I've got less concern. But I think we should also acknowledge the good job that the developer has made with the enabling development to the side of the listed building and following the listed building in one part and also following Bank Street in the other part. But I think we should acknowledge that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to take the two other councillors who've indicated they wish to speak before I ask for any officer response. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I sort of go through this report in sort of page order? It might be easier for everyone. So if we go to page 5, 3.11, they say the boardwalk is to be cantilevered from the listed building. Well, I wonder if this is probably an invasive sort of procedure, as it were, and will it cause damage to the listed buildings? That's my first point. Now, on the same page, 314, they're talking about aquatic planting. Well, I mean, in my view, it's best to let nature take its course on planting, so I wouldn't necessarily want to see planting carried out. And on page 6, the drawing of the boardwalk talks about a floating walkway. If it's floating, clearly it's going to be on top of the actual water, therefore cutting out all the light from that part of the mill pond. So I'm not sure that that's a particularly good idea. So that's that. Then going on to page 10, condition 1, I did wonder if we really need it, because if this bit of land is being transferred to the council, we can't really, in my view, impose that condition, but we'll take advice on that, I guess. And then moving on to page 14, yeah, I agree with Councillor Munford. We should have 100% charging points for electric vehicles in all parking areas, so I agree with Councillor Munford on that one. And then page 15 again, oh yeah, page 14, we should again have individual in condition 18 and condition, what was it, 19, so I think we should say that. Then condition 21, as I said, usually best to leave the planting to nature rather than actually plant it ourselves. I'm pleased to say we're talking about habitat for solitary bees, so I'm glad that's getting in now. Finally, on the listed building bit,
I'm sorry, Keith, could you leave that till we actually get onto the listed building thing?
Oh, okay. Right,
we're not on that at the moment.
No. All right, well, that's it for now then. Thank you, Chair.
Right, that was quite a lot, so I'm actually going to ask if Mr. Mackey or Mr. Jarman wish to come back at that point, because that was quite a lot. That was longer than I anticipated.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go through both councillors' comments very quickly. In terms of secondary glazing, it's condition 23 rather than condition 9 that will secure adequate specification. Regarding the lighting scheme and the need to have regard to the future River Len part, yes, that's an acceptable extension of the wording in our view, just to refer to both. In terms of the potential cantilever damage to the building, our Heritage Officer and Historic England are content that there would be no significant harm to the fabric of the building, nor to the setting of the building through the introduction of the boardwalk. So they don't raise an objection on that. Regarding the aquatic planting, yes, we can deal with that through condition 21. And if we feel that the floating element of the walkway, which is the westernmost end where it steps down to the water, if it's felt that that would increase the risk of disturbance and littering, then through the design review we can take that element out as part of the detail of the boardwalk condition.
Thank you. I think that addresses everything. Oh, sorry, the additional the 100% electric charging point.
If members wish to impose it, we don't have a policy basis to insist upon a set amount. It's a scheme that has two different types of car parking, both internal and external, but we could certainly set a high benchmark if that's what members wish. It's a town centre site, so car ownership will be less significant than a traditional suburban scheme, but if you feel that it's necessary and consistent with other decisions, then you can ask for a higher level. Sorry, there was one further point. Councillor Atkinson queried condition 1 and whether condition 1 was necessary.
Yes.
I just remind members that if after 6 months you are offered the land, then condition 1 allows you to consider receiving the land in an informed manner, i.e. the applicant will have assisted in providing whatever information they have regarding engineering and other surveys.
Yeah, it's probably just as well to keep it. And on the charging points, I think it is the consensus of this committee and the council as a whole that we go for a high level.
Mm-hmm. Do you wish to set a specific percentage or ask officers to negotiate a materially higher level?
As high as you can get it.
Noted. I will set a minimum percentage at a high level.
Yes. Right, Councillor Eaves, please. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep mine short and sweet. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Mumford said actually this evening. My one query and question is that we're planning on putting in a lot of mitigation in terms of noise, which is rightfully done. I think Mr. Wilson made a very good point that the modelling at the moment is very difficult. Even as he pointed out, in the winter, the beer gardens and outside areas are not at full capacity. Even doing it this summer is going to be very different to what it would have been last summer. I don't think that that's actually been considered fully yet in terms of, I don't know if we can do a modelling and then increase percentages based upon what would be expected. But what my concern is, and the only concern I've got, because I think this is actually a really, really good application, and I'm very pleased that we've got something like this coming forward to us, is, I know it's very much ifs, buts and maybes. What position are we going to have when complaints will come in? Can we turn around to residents and say, well, you bought it there, you got to just tough it out? Or is it going to be taken to the licensing committee? I don't quite know how we can take a stance on it, because it's ifs, buts and maybes at the moment.
If I can possibly assist you with a parallel and with other members, you will all be aware of Moo Moo's currently being refurbished and rebranded, but exactly that contingency did occur, as you may be aware, Councillor. And yes, effectively the council did turn around and say the Moo Moo's and its predecessor establishments were there first and therefore take priority. And it's a view I strongly hold myself, that to preserve the vitality of the town, we will not be going down the route of many London boroughs that have closed down long established and vital parts of their business community just because one resident has moved in and suddenly decides they don't like it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad that you share that sentiment. That was really my only concern. Having dealt with numerous noise complaints in my previous life, I know how they can often be referred to. And so if we're happy to at least push it from our side, that will be a position that we'll keep, then I've got no actual issues with this. And I think it's a very good application. I'd be minded to vote forward.
Okay, well, I'm going to take any further comments that are coming through. Councillor Mumford and Miss Peake are commenting, and then I'm going to round up. Councillor Mumford first, and then Miss Cheryl, please.
Just basically that the officers came back on all the points, and thank you for that. The last one I just put in the EIM, it's to do with the food hall and keeping it to this market feeling that we were given at pre-HAP. We've been given in all of the presentations, and my concerns there.
To be honest, unless we had an SBD coming out or a local plan policy in the review, I'm not sure how could do that. But I'm open to suggestions from officers.
Chair, I discussed that very point with the applicant this afternoon. They accept the council's view that there are some food and drink uses that we would consider positive and some that we would not consider appropriate. So the condition will not permit, for example, what was an A5 use to be the dominant use in the building, but it might allow a local sort of farmer to sell hot sausage rolls or mulled wine or whatever, but we certainly wouldn't allow a national fast food chain to be the dominant use in the building, and the conditions will control that.
Okay.
Thank you. Happy.
Cheryl, did you wish to come in? I think I saw you indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just on the noise point, appreciate it's quite a difficult issue to grapple with, and it will be obviously difficult for people that are living in that vicinity if it is noisy. Noise and nuisance are they are planning matters in terms of conditioning things to make sure that we get things right, as we've got our acoustic condition 23. But equally, they fall into private civil matters in terms of nuisance. One of the speakers' statements referenced potentially an easement.
Yes.
And again, the committee will be aware that easements are, again, private property matters outside the planning sphere. So much like we could, we could discuss, for example, the need to relocate a footpath, for example, but we couldn't condition that or control that because it's a separate process and a separate application. So on the noise issue, I think condition 23 that is in your papers this evening sets out a robust condition for requiring measures to be addressed and the retaining of those measures to be there in perpetuity. And I would just sort of second what Councillor English has said, that the council, I'm sure, will take a robust view. The agent of change principle is firmly established in the NPPF and in the NPPG, and it is very clear that the onus is on the person who brings the change, so the applicant in this particular instance, to mitigate the impacts on existing commercial uses. So I think the condition as it's drafted at the moment would do what we would need it to do, and I think it gives us the position that we need. I would just leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Councillor Brindle, I see you've asked half a question. I will take you, then I am going to conclude the discussion. Councillor Brindle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Austin, if you could possibly tell me or give me some idea of the distance between the proposed new build and the residents currently at the rear of the car park, I'd be obliged. Thank you.
Apologies, Chair, I don't have that figure to hand. I mean, obviously, within a town centre, you get relationships between buildings that may be more dense and closer than you might get on a traditional housing development. And having worked in central London for 30 odd years, I'm well aware of the fact that within sort of town centres and urban areas, it is always accepted that there is a let's say a more cosy relationship between buildings and uses than you might otherwise normally get, and that's an unavoidable condition of a town centre. But I'm afraid I can't give you the specific separation figure offhand. But when we assessed the drawings and we looked at the relationship between those buildings, we felt, for the context of the town centre, the relationship was acceptable, and that whilst the objector says that the reduction in building height is due to a covenant rather than design, it is nevertheless a design of the building, and the building significantly drops in height adjacent to that residential cluster.
I was just a bit concerned about any loss of light there might be, that was all. Okay, thank you.
Duly noted. Right, is everyone clear on what we're actually about to vote on? Officers, members, it's more or less as presented. It's with changes to seeking as many electric charging points as we can negotiate, plus delegated powers in consultation with myself as ward member and Councillor Harwood on the details of pardon me, cough there, on the details of the delegated matters to be determined. Is that clear to everyone? in particular the design of the boardwalk and.
In addition to the design of the boardwalk, I think it's also uses. I think there's one of the drawings those people.
Yes, I should have said that. Thank you,
Councillor. So that I think that links into whether we disturb it or not, and I think that's integral.
Yeah, have I missed anything, officers, members? I think I've got everything.
Chairman, was there also an extension of the lighting to the daylighted bit of the River Len?
Well, I think we'll leave that and we'll take that on board in relation to the discussion of the handling of the boardwalk, because it relates to it as well, I think. Because I'm not convinced about that, how that would actually work. So I think we need to look at that.
Mr. Chairman, what I asked for was to in the lighting that's going forward, they've asked particular attention for lighting on the Mill Pond on condition 29.
That's right.
And the officers tonight have agreed to include the daylighted area, and Austin is nodding his head. They've agreed to it, so that should be part of it.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah, we're saying the same thing, only in slightly different words. And finally, I assume that we are amending the planting scheme to be indigenous species where appropriate, but no planting where we consider it not to be necessary. In other words, where the natural approach is best, as referred to by Councillor Harwood and Atkinson. Is that clear? In terms of the details of a landscaping agreement. Councillor, are you clear on that, Austin?
I am, Chair. I've got electric vehicle charging, lighting, uses, boardwalk design, and as the conditions that we will put back to you before issuing the decision. On the natural planting, the applicant has proposed an indicative scheme that favours natural planting, but there's a condition to require those details to be approved. So we're not signing it off now.
No, that's what I thought. So, Tony, very briefly, you're asking a question on the legal agreement.
Yeah, the legal agreement, the issue around the unilateral undertaking and the land transfer, so that we can choreograph this appropriately and ensure that the river is daylighted, coincides with construction work and so on, and they don't get in each other's way. Is there any legal barring or problem about us undertaking some of that project planning now, of getting that kind of coalition of the willing together to start taking that forward? Or is there a point where legally we cannot even start talking about it? I just wanted as much room and space as possible to ensure we can deliver that daylighting scheme on time.
I can't see any obstacle, but Austin, are you aware of any obstacle?
No, obviously the council would be entirely at risk in terms of the cost of commissioning those works. For example, we may spend money doing the feasibility studies, but may later choose not to take the land. But there's nothing stopping the council carrying out its own investigations before the applicant formally offers the transfer of land. But we can certainly discuss that with the applicant and make sure we have a better understanding of their development timetable.
It's pretty unlikely the council wouldn't take the land. The worst outcome is that nothing happens for some considerable time with the land, if you see what I mean, Austin.
Yes, the trigger is the granting of planning permission, not the commencement of development. So within 6 months of the grant of planning, even if they do nothing, they still have to offer the land to us. So the daylighting scheme won't be held back for any reason if the development didn't proceed.
Exactly my point. Okay, right, everyone clear? In that case, I shall ask the facilitator to call the vote.
Chairman, it's Debbie here.
Yeah.
Chairman, it's Debbie here. I don't think anybody's proposed or seconded anything
I did
yet.
propose it, but but you're quite correct. There wasn't a second. Have I got a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Right, in that case, now we'll take the vote.
And that includes, Chairman, all the points that Austin raised in his introduction.
Indeed, I did reference that. But thank you for making doubly sure. Right, Mr. O'Connell, if you will go through the list alphabetically.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Brindle.
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
4.
Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Eaves.
4.
Councillor Harwood.
4.
Councillor Kimmins.
4.
Councillor Munford.
4.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
4.
Councillor Perry.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
Councillor Vizard.
4.
And Councillor Wilby.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the voting.
Thank you very much. I believe that was unanimous, but if I could just check with Mrs. Snook.
Yes, Chairman, that was unanimous.
Thank you very much. That means that application is approved with on the amended basis, as discussed earlier. We now move to the former route site at Len House, Mill Street, Palace Avenue. We don't have any speakers specifically on this application, but I believe that Councillor Atkinson did want to raise a point on it. So if you want to say anything briefly in introduction, Mr. Mackey.
Chair, I have very little to add other than to remind members that the listed building consent relates to the physical works to the listed building rather than the development itself. We have engaged Historic England from a very early stage. They are very supportive. Our own heritage officer has been involved in the design. We feel that it's an excellent approach to reusing a building in a positive way, and that the works to the listed building are the minimum necessary to make the scheme deliverable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Atkinson, you wanted to raise a point on this earlier on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, Condition 8, English Heritage is now called Historic England, so I think that should be changed. I believe it's the May 2016 edition that we're talking about. And I was wondering if maybe a photographic record should be kept during the reconstruction process as well, so for future historians they can see how the building developed during this reconstruction process. So I'd like to add that in if possible. That's all. Thank you.
I think actually that's quite a good idea, and it doesn't seem to be a particularly onerous extra condition. What do you think, Mr. Mackey?
No, Chair, we can make that clear within the wording of Condition 8. It's an increasingly popular route to providing modern archiving. There's already a very detailed video survey of the existing building, but to record the works during conversion, I think, is a very good suggestion. So we can add that to Condition 8.
Thank you. Any further comments on that? If not, I'm going to fairly rapidly conclude this discussion. No, in that case, I will move the recommendation with the amendment proposed by Councillor Atkinson. Is that seconded?
I'll second it.
Councillor Commence.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak now, Councillor Commence, or?
No, I'll reserve my right.
Well, we're going to the vote in a minute, so it'll be now or never, Ashley.
No, it's fine. I think you've covered everything. So, and I think it was a brilliant idea about keeping a photographic record, especially because there is a lot of historians around Maidstone that do like to visit the museum and have a look at stuff over the years.
And it'll definitely end up on the Maidstone Past Matters Facebook page, I'm sure, which is worth a visit if you haven't been there. Right. Well, everyone clear, in which case I shall ask the facilitator to go through the list of members with the amended recommendation. Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Brindle.
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
If you can indicate by IM if you've got the ability, Karen, and we'll continue with the verbal vote. Ryan, please.
Yeah, I'll come back. Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Eaves.
4.
Councillor Harwood.
4.
Councillor Kimmins.
4.
Councillor Munford.
4.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
4.
Councillor Perry.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
Councillor Vizard.
4.
And Councillor Wilby.
4.
Thank you.
Thank you. And have we got Miss Councillor Chapeltay with us yet? Apparently not.
Okay, I think we'll take Councillor Chapeltay as being absent for that item.
Yeah, I think we have to. Right.
Chairman, we have a message coming in.
Oh, hang on.
Before we announce the result.
Yes, I shall wait for Councillor Chapeltay to finish her message. With bated breath. Yeah, that's not indicating a vote. That's just saying that she can't.
So if we take her as absent and then assume that she's going to leave and rejoin.
Indeed. Well, apart from Councillor Chapeltay, I think that was unanimous. Can you confirm that, Mrs. Snook?
That's correct, Chairman. 12 in favour, none against.
Thank you very much, members and officers, for all the hard work on both of those. We now have the recommendation on both of those approved. We now turn, I am going to go through this one, hope it's not too lengthy. Agenda item 15, page 73, and I call upon Mr. Mackey to introduce the report of land rear of 13 Manor Close, please. Are you with us, Mr. Mackey?
Just bear with me, Chair. I'm just taking control of the screen back. Bear with me a moment.
Of course, of course.
Share. Right. Bear with me. We'll skip to the next item. Here we go. Apologies.
That's all right.
Land rear of 13 Manor Close, Bearstead. The application site is situated centrally within an existing cul-de-sac that contains predominantly single-storey bungalows, but a range of chalet and two-storey houses as well. The area shaded blue shows the footprint of the existing house, which is currently undergoing extension. The land in red shows the application site, which is proposed to accommodate an additional single-storey dwelling. This is a tandem form of backland development that members will appreciate we wouldn't normally consider acceptable in principle. However, in this location, there are particular conditions that affect the consideration of the application. The first is number 18A, which lies adjacent. However, our records appear to suggest that this property dates back to the 1960s. More recently, around 5 years ago, diagonally opposite the site, we approved a further backland development scheme here. So those are considerations that we have to take on board. On this plan, you can see on the left the existing site plan with the existing vegetation plotted out. On the right, you can see the proposed site plan and the position of the dwelling. You can see that it's located adjacent to number 18A, and you can see the relationship with both the host dwelling and the neighbours at number 14 and number 12. This drawing shows the boundary vegetation that exists and which the applicant proposes to retain, and should planning permission be granted, there are a series of conditions that seek clarification on the retention of those existing hedgerow features. This is a photograph taken from the rear garden looking back at the host property. You can see here a garage that is partly under construction. That was part of the original planning permission to refurbish the host house. However, they secured a non-material amendment to the permission to not include the garage and have 2 parking spaces in front. Therefore, the proposed driveway access to the new dwelling would come down the side of number 13. The garage would obviously be removed and a new driveway constructed down the slope. Number 12, you can just see the edge of the property here. Obviously, this boundary runs down the side of number 12 and then along its rear garden. This is looking from the existing house back towards the location of the dwelling. The property sits approximately here in the area that I'm highlighting. So the hedgerow would be just inside the back wall of the proposed boundary, and the front wall would be here. To the rear of the property is a public footpath, and beyond that, the A20 and the various commercial uses on there. This is the back garden of the proposed house. So in terms of space standards, the property would have an adequate level of space. This is number 18A adjacent. They have made objections to the proposal, including the concerns regarding the impact on these two windows. They identify this as a bathroom window, but this is a bedroom window, and have raised concerns regarding adjacency, overbearing impacts, and potential loss of light. Again, this is a close up of the boundary to number 12, and you can just see number 12 again there. You've seen the site plan already. These are the elevations of the building. So it's a relatively modest 2-bedroom bungalow, single story with a relatively low pitch roof. Officers consider that in terms of overlooking relationship between buildings, although tandem and normally not acceptable, in this instance they have managed to design out any adverse impacts on the neighbouring amenity as a result of the building. I think the principal issue for members to consider is the acceptability of this access route adjacent to number 12. As I've indicated, we've proposed a series of conditions that require further information on boundary treatment, further information on the planting to be retained, and how those trees will be protected whilst that access is constructed. So it's not a form of development that we would normally consider appropriate, but having regard to the site-specific considerations, in this instance, on balance, officers recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have indications from Mr. Paget as an objector, and a video from Mr. Street for the applicant, which I hope we have.
Chairman, we do have a couple of members who are having issues or are currently having issues, and I know that Julie's trying to help them. So
I think, well, I was in two minds about whether to take a break or not. So what I'm going to do is, whilst this is sorted out, we'll actually have a 5-minute break, because this item will may possibly take some time. So everyone else who hasn't got a connectivity issue, go and get a cup of tea, and we'll resume at 28 minutes past. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Chapel-Tay, I think you're okay now, aren't you? Before you go. Karen indicated that she was okay, Ryan, on that. She just had a broadband connection. I'm not sure about Councillor Brindle. I think I've advised her to leave the meeting and rejoin. If you ever get a sound issue, that's the easiest fix. It does look like she's got a sound issue.
Julie, I'll remove her from the meeting, and then
yes,
I'll
I was going to say that. Yeah, please. I was just going to say that. Do that. Which is what I did with Councillor Chapel-Tay, because she was kind of stuck in the no man's land. Debbie, can I just check something with you on the phone?
Yes.
Councillor English just told me that he's got a video for Mr. Street. That's not right, is it? Is it?
Yes,
have I got them round the wrong way? Which one? Oh God, that was lucky. I had a lady queued up for Yalding. I thought this was a Yalding one. What are we on now?
The chairman's sort of gone out of order a little bit. So
so we're not on land at Teesside Nurseries.
No, the
you can't go doing that to
15.
me.
I did message you, Julie, when it happened.
Oh, did you?
Councillor Atkinson. It's not quite 28 minutes past yet.
No.
Would you like me to complete the roll call?
Yes, we'll come back, particularly if in due course.
Councillor Brindle.
Yeah.
Present.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
Present.
Councillor English.
Present.
Councillor Eaves.
Present.
Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Kimmins.
Present.
Councillor Mumford.
Present.
I'm just going to mute you, Councillor Kimmins. Oh, thank you. Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
Present.
Councillor Perry.
I've seen him.
I can see him now. Councillor Perry.
He's there. I can see him, and so I can see Councillor Harwood as well.
Councillor Harwood.
Present.
Yeah, Councillor Harwood. Yeah, sorry, I was I had to take another telephone call.
Councillor Spooner.
Present.
Councillor Vizard.
Present.
Councillor Wilby.
Present.
And Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, present. Sorry, I was sorting the dog out downstairs.
Oh, I was expecting the dog to join us, but there you go.
That's everyone, Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Right. Right. As I was just saying before everyone cut out, we have two people who've indicated they wish to speak by various forms. Mr. Paget, an objector, with a written statement and a video from Mr. Street, which hopefully we'll see later. So I start with the statement from Mr. Paget. Our objection relates to two main considerations, access and overshadowing. With regard to access, nowhere in the Maidstone local plan do we see any support given for residents to start knocking down their garages and instead squeeze in a cramped access road to their rear garden in order to encourage new development. However, the application seeks to suggest that by creating a narrow access road 10 foot wide that is 170 foot long. A road of such scale is not only out of keeping with the character of the area, but alarmingly such approval would be compromising the council's own guidelines and vision. Manor Close already suffers terribly from parking congestion. We already contend with numerous residents of Yeoman Lane leaving their cars on our close morning, noon and night. Commuters that park here during the day and walk to the railway station. Local residents that park here to visit the medical practice. We even have people walking here to get to Costa and get their coffee. The access road would reduce the parking for the existing developed house at this address with decreased off-road parking area and a loss of its garage to instead allow access for a new dwelling. Another unusual aspect of this proposal is the positioning of the proposed new dwelling. Despite genuine concerns regarding overshadowing, this proposal seeks to build within 2 metres of the boundary to 18A Yeoman Lane, but seeks to leave a gap of double this, 4 metres, on the other side of the property. There is alongside only gardens, not alongside any property. Considering 18A Yeoman Lane is only 85 centimetres from the boundary on the west side of the proposed dwelling and includes a bedroom window that would look directly at a blank wall less than 3 metres away, it seems illogical not to instead build further to the east and the other boundary fence. When you consider the applicants have an outstanding party wall breach and an outstanding right to light notice with solicitors, it makes no sense why they do not build a further 2 metres away to negate the party wall matter and reduce any light impact to the existing property. Whilst we are objecting to the application, if the NBC were mindful to approve, we would seriously request that the positioning is moved at least 2 metres to the east away from 18A Yeoman Lane. This would at the very least be seen as a well-chosen compromise by the applicants and away from their direct neighbours. One final point that we asked to be raised is why access from the rear of the plot to Yeoman Court, via Yeoman Court, has not been considered. This will provide direct access to the plot without the need for a long, narrow access road and would enable the existing property on the plot to retain its curtilage and parking area. Parking capacity exists in Yeoman Court and access could be made at the very end of the plot. We ask that on the grounds of access and overshadowing, this application is refused, or at the very least a review of the positioning of the dwelling and the access from Yeoman Court is carried out before any consideration to approve is complemented. And that's on behalf of numbers 14, 12, 3, Manor Close and 18A Yeoman Lane. Thank you very much, and I turn now hopefully to the video from Mr. Street for the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a warning, the sound isn't great on this, but hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Just bear with me while I share my desktop for you.
Thank you very much.
Just confirm that you can see that. You should be able to.
I can indeed, yes.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody to speak this evening. I'm Andrew Street, planning consultant, working on behalf of the applicant. Before we submitted this application, we arranged a pre-application and consultation meeting with the planning department and received written feedback. The feedback received on this proposal, which was for a detached bungalow, was positive and indicated that we would receive a favourable recommendation from planning officers. The site is currently garden land and is well screened from any public vantage points and is bounded by existing properties that front onto both Manor Close and Yeoman Lane. As the report states, this is a backland site. In this case, there is already an historical precedence in the locality for this pattern and type of development. There is the adjacent property at number 18A, which is similar to with an access off Yeoman Lane. In addition, in 2015, planning permission was granted for a bungalow at the rear of number 4 Manor Close. On both properties, and also with this proposal, there is a single width access road beside existing properties for vehicles to access the new house. The design and location of the property has been positioned to prevent any overlooking of the adjoining houses. Their gardens will also be well screened by both existing and proposed new landscaping on the boundary. The proposed site in the rear garden also has a lower ground height than properties at 12, 13, 14 Manor Close. Therefore, the proposal will not be visible from the close. Furthermore, it's a modest bungalow design accommodating 2 bedrooms at ground floor level. In summary, there is already a precedent set for this type of development in the locality of Manor Close and Yeoman Lane. The character of the surrounding residential area will not be harmed by this proposal. The proposal, as I've mentioned, is designed to be a 2-bedroom bungalow, and acceptable living accommodation can be provided within the new dwelling. The amenity and neighbouring properties will be maintained. There will be no overlooking and no loss of privacy as a result of this proposal. Existing trees and landscaping on the boundary will be retained and will be within the proposed garden area on the site. Finally, we'd just like to add that Bearsted Parish Council previously raised no objections to this proposal when we submitted an identical application late last year following the pre-application advice. We ask that the proposal recommended for approval this evening meets with your approval. Many thanks.
Right, that was Mr. Street, and I hope it was a little tinny, but I think it was clear enough for members to make out, and indeed officers. Councillor Spooner, as the ward member, would you like to take us through your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Indeed, so.
Yeah. Good. Well, I have looked long and hard at this proposal, and as objectively as I possibly can. Now, generally, planners just do not like backland or tandem development, but it does happen. And there are several instances in Bearsted, 2 of which are quite close to where this property is. They normally occur because of some obscure reason in the past. Either it's a historical circumstances that have led to it happening, or else it's been a poor planning decision. In this particular case, I must admit to being horrified by the back garden bungalow at number 4 Manor Close, just across the road. I think, in retrospect, we might think that was a poor decision, but it is a better configured site to accept a separate additional dwelling, and it does have a 5-metre wide access road that leads to it. With regard to number 18A, Roseacre, Yeoman Lane, that is served also by a 5 metre wide access road, which actually serves a block of garages. And it occurs to me that those garages were perhaps built, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago to provide off-road parking for the Victorian houses along Yeoman Lane, which didn't have off-street parking. And but once again, an access could be provided to 18A. What really strikes me about this current proposal is the long access road down the side of the property. It will extend. It's hard up against the boundary for number 12. It extends for nearly half the length of the plot at number 12, and I just think this is totally unacceptable. I think the infill plot itself, plot number 1, would be acceptable if access could be obtained from somewhere else. But to bring it down the side and between number 13 and 12 is, I think, totally unacceptable. The access and the turning area and parking area are going to be very, very intrusive to the private rear garden areas of number 12. And I suppose another thing that's at the back of my mind is we say there's no such thing as precedent in planning. I prefer to think that circumstances can be compromised. And I think that we will be setting up some very, very compromising situations throughout the borough if we were to permit this scheme. And I can think of no end of properties, some down Manor Close, many others throughout the borough where there might be a gap at the side of a house. There may be a shed, there may be a garage. Oh, let's knock it down. We'll extend our drive and we'll have a back garden house. I can well see that happening all over the borough, and I think other members of this committee need to think about that with regard to their own wards. But I would like to move that this application be refused because of the impact of that driveway and the turning and parking area for plot number 1.
Can I just ask whether that's seconded? That is seconded by Councillor Harwood. I asked you whether you want to speak in a moment. Just out of curiosity, Dennis, the issue that you raised in relation to the access, are you convinced the refusal is the right way to go, rather than because the change from the current application would simply be too great to require to be dealt with by deferral to change the access arrangements? Just checking.
I think the objection is that great, to be quite. I don't think.
Yeah. I just need to be. Because the difference in the application would be so significant.
I would have thought by now the applicant would have investigated other potential means of access.
I don't think we can necessarily assume that. But
No.
Can I just check that you're essentially saying that would be a significant departure and effectively a new application?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, just checking. Needed to clarify that. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood.
I think the Ward Council has covered it in a way, in that the key plank of the argument as to why we should allow such an incongruous form of development and such a bizarre access track seems to be that there's another one nearby that's not quite as bad. I really would like to underline the point again that Councillor Spooner made. North Ward, because there isn't much space, we suffer from an awful lot of tandem development in Sanding Lane, in Boxley Road and other areas, and they are very difficult. They're very difficult for the residents involved because of the issues they throw up. They're very difficult for people who are delivering to those houses or trying to drop things off. For those of us who are trying to deliver letters or leaflets or whatever, they are quite uncomfortable spaces to share with an Ocado lorry. So I think there are some issues. I think the other point, and it probably couldn't be incorporated as another ground for refusal, but we have seen some applications which are quite balanced, where the applicants have gone the extra mile in terms of design and in terms of added value. And I don't think we're seeing that here. It's a very kind of simple design. It's got no solar PV. The boundary treatments seem to be quite primitive in terms of the impact. I just feel that it is jarring, and the access is totally inappropriate in what is a very pleasant residential area where we are already having a precedent quoted at us in terms of the justification. And these are long gardens, and we could just see them filled up with development, and you would end up like parts of Sanding Lane. Thank you.
Right, can I be clear as to the grounds, please, that this has been proposed and seconded on? And then I'm going to ask the officers for any comment. Councillor Spooner, Councillor Harwood, I do need to be clear as to the grounds. Right, while you two are thinking about that, I'll take Councillor Perry.
Councillor Spooner, you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I totally support what has been said by Councillor Spooner and Councillor Harwood. I think Councillor Harwood hit the nail on the head when he said...
You're fading in and out, John.
We seem to be looking at this from a precedent point of view, and it seems to me we must judge this on its own merits. And there've been some... Is that... Can you hear me?
You're fading in and out, John.
Yeah, no, I couldn't hear you either. So,
Councillor Perry, could you try turning your video off?
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Much clearer.
Okay, then let's go on that then. I just want to support what has just been said, particularly by Councillor Harwood and by Councillor Spooner. The idea that you seem to be said that it causes precedent for similar developments. Well, I just don't think we should judge it on that. We should be judged on its own merits. And the access is clearly awful. I was quite surprised, and I think Councillor Harwood used the word bizarre, and I totally support that. Actually, it just didn't seem right, and I couldn't see any merits in this at all. So I just wanted to say I totally support the proposal to refuse this. I think this is not a good proposal at all. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood, Councillor Spooner, have you got grounds yet? Please. Dennis, are you with us?
Yeah, I was waiting for Dennis as the mover.
Sorry.
I've got some, but I want Dennis to go first.
Yeah, sorry, I had inadvertently muted myself, but I'm now back in the land.
Sounds painful, right?
The single width driveway squeezed into the proposed development and extending tightly along approximately 50% of the boundary with the adjacent property. Is that anybody got that so far?
Yeah, and
together with the proposed parking and turning area for the new dwelling, do not respect the privacy and amenity of the rear garden of the adjoining property, and will create unacceptable levels of noise and disturbance and loss of privacy that will be severely detrimental to its residential amenities, contrary to local plan policies DM1 little 4, DM9 little 2, and DM11 little 2 to little 4.
Right, thank you. Councillor Harwood, do you agree with that, and do you have anything to add?
No, I absolutely agree with that, but I'm also concerned that the access to the proposed development is long and relatively narrow, and there's no scope for a passing place. And I do see that as potentially that will lead to conditions detrimental to pedestrian safety in particular. And for those servicing the plot, should it go ahead, I think there is another issue here around the spacious nature of this neighbourhood with long gardens, that if you did start to see a creep of tandem development, it would be jarring and incongruous, and lead to a diminution in streetscape quality?
Well, I think you're talking about a substantial change in the nature of and character of the area.
Yeah,
including the actual streetscape, but not just that. Mr. Mackey, have you any comments on those grounds?
Chair, no, I didn't get every word of Councillor Spooner's wording, but the grounds.
You got the gist, though, didn't you?
The grounds are clear, and I understand them.
Okay, fine.
So we will go through the recording and write up the detailed wording of that, if that is what members agree. Regarding highway safety, there was no comment from KCC Highways.
Well, there wouldn't be on such a small development. They normally don't comment on something this small. It doesn't necessarily imply support.
No, officers took the view on this that the risk of a car entering and leaving the application site at the same time was relatively low, and therefore the risk of a car having to reverse out would be low. For that reason, we didn't propose a highway-related reason for refusal.
Yeah, I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, but I'm just saying that the KCC wouldn't have commented on something as small as this. It normally wouldn't be within their protocol.
Yes, I think it is worth flagging up, however, that this is the only access for pedestrians as well as cars, and it does seem a bit of a conflict because I've heard of shared spaces, but the only way you're going to get a pedestrian and a car up something this narrow is over the top of it.
Yeah, I take your point, Councillor Harwood, and I was just making the point that KCC wouldn't have commented on something this small, and therefore, so we shouldn't take it as necessarily that they're that they are in favour of it. That's simply my observation.
I agree.
Right, members, I think unless anyone wants to speak in favour of the application, I am actually going to round it up here, despite the fact that a number of people have wished to speak. Unless they wish to add grounds, of course.
I'd like to add something.
Councillor Mumford.
We are looking at 18A, which was built in the 60s, as setting the precedence. I would like the mover to consider the. We're talking about the amenity of 12, but it also affects greatly the amenity of the building at number 13. And we are looking at an application that in the future will be affecting the amenity, well, straight away, of number 13. I know they're the applicant, but it doesn't.
That is a fair point. That is a fair point, actually. One should take into account lots of the cramped conditions for the people who would live in the property as well. Councillor Spooner?
Yes, I think that's something that could be added in because it would affect not only number 12 but also the future residents of number 13.
Yeah, so I think that's fine.
I think that's a good point. I'm grateful to Steve for picking that one up. That is important.
I assume you're okay with that, Councillor Harwood? Councillor Harwood?
Absolutely. It will affect all of the surrounding properties, yes.
Including the new one, if it were built. Okay, thanks. Unless anyone wants to speak against the motion or add another ground, I'm going to the vote. In that case, and we're going to a vote on the motion to refuse for the grounds set out. Mr. O'Connell, if you would take the roll of members, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Brindle.
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
4.
Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Eaves.
4. Right, good.
Councillor Harwood.
4.
Councillor Kimmins.
4.
Councillor Munford.
4.
Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
4.
Councillor Perry.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
Councillor Vizard.
4.
And Councillor Wilby.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the voting.
Thank you. Mrs. Snook, was that unanimous?
It was, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, thank you, officers and members, for your involvement. Moving on, And this will please some people who've been waiting for it for a while too. Item 14 at Teesside, I think that's pronounced nurseries. Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, can I just get an okay that you can see my screen?
You are a little faint on the sound, James.
Oh, okay, I'll turn my volume up.
Oh, you're all right. You're all right now.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a new headset on, so thank you. Right. So this is an application for, it's part retrospective for change of use from part of the horticulture and nursery site to leisure recreation for the stationing of mobile shepherd's huts, a short stay tourist accommodation and ancillary works. I'll just go through photographs of the site, members. So this is the application site. So effectively what we've got around here, we've got the River Tees around here. I'll show you that in a bit more detail. The blue is the wider site and the red is the application site. So it utilizes the existing access point along here and is only positioned to the sort of the north-western part of the site, hence the distance from Lees Road, as I set out in the report, approximately 190 metres, and then you've got the public right-of-way that runs along this part of the site. So this is just the constraints plan. So this shows you the public right-of-way, shows you the river. This is roughly the approximately position where the shepherd's huts will be stationed. The red are the listed buildings. So in terms of consideration of setting, that's an important matter. And obviously it shows you the distance from Lees Road running down here across to the site. This is just an aerial photograph to show the site taken from Google Earth. So obviously the application site is in this area here, and you can see the River Tees running around here. Obviously the main considerable impacts from this site are a river flooding that occur. The site is located in zones 3 and 2 on the EA's flood risk maps. Most of the site, well, all the application site in this area is covered within zone 3, but there are pockets of zone 2 around this area and this area around here where the land is higher than the surrounding land, but then the rest of the Laddingford is all located within zones 2. So this is a sort of a higher point in the local area. Slightly closer view of the site, just wanted to sort of point out, so this is the Checkers Inn public house, and the public right-of-way runs along here, and there is an access into the site, which I'll show you later, a secondary access into the site from here. Obviously, the principal concern from the parish council relates to the flooding episodes that occurred on the site, and I'll go through that in a minute at this location. Members would have an opportunity, if they so wish, that there is a secondary point of access here. It's not within the application site, but is within the blue land owned by the applicant. This is just going into the site now. So this is a view looking north. This is the reasons why it's part retrospective, because the bases are already in situ, and you've got Teesside, which is unconnected with the site in terms of land ownership. So this is the nearest residential dwelling to the site. This is just showing looking north towards the River Tees, so that runs behind this tree belt or adjacent to this tree belt here, and then off to the right hand side is the tree copse that I refer to set out in the report. This is the area, effectively you've got the River Tees right in this location here. There was a pole barn in this position here, which was an issue that was raised by an objector to the application, who commented whether it had permission. It was not part of the application, it was not contained within the application, and therefore I did request that it's either included within the application or removed. The applicant has removed that pole barn, and therefore there is no breach of current planning at the site. And in terms of this is the secondary access that I referred to. So you've got the public right-of-way that runs off here. You've got the public house just down there. This was recently cleared It was heavily overgrown when I went over to the site, and they were just clearing the site. So there is an option, if it's so required, for a secondary access to be utilised. As I say, it's not within the red line boundary of the application site, but is within blue land owned by the applicant. So in terms of the site layout plan, in terms of, I think it's clearly, hopefully I might just try and enlarge this so if members can, that's the important part. So in terms of, this is the red line boundary part of the site. This is the River Tees. This was the area I just showed you where that pole barn was previously located, is now gone. This green line is included within your report. And this shows the maximum extent of the historical flooding on the site. And as you can see over in this area here, it does include the access, because obviously the river then bends around here and it works either side of that. So this shows the extent of the historical flooding on the site. But just to be clear for members, obviously the Zone 3 washes over the application site, and obviously Zone 2 also washes the over the application site with high pockets around this area, but they are actually outside the application site. I just got to go back and put that back to normal, sorry. So what you've got is design and elevations of the Shepherd's Hut. It is important that members obviously take the design into consideration in this application. It is a matter of law that members do actually consider the design of the Shepherd's Hut. They do fall within the definition of a caravan. However, notwithstanding that, due to a recent judgment that the chairman may know particularly well, and I may allude to that at the end of the appeal assessment, obviously members are duty bound by law to take into account considerations of the design of that chattel on the site, and therefore what I'm showing members is the design of the Shepherd's Hut. And you've also got a photograph in your presentation as well, but this is a photograph of the Shepherd's Hut. So it is a particularly appropriate form of tourism accommodation, I would suggest, in the countryside. It is a characteristic form, unlike possibly one might say of a caravan, which is an established form but can have a degree of harm. I would suggest that this is causing no significant harm to the character appearance or the visual appearance of the site. They are currently positioned on site. The site layout plan showed 3 on site, and you will note, members, in the report I have conditioned condition 1 of that report, which says no more than 3 Shepherd's Huts of this design shall be stationed on the site. I would request at this time that on page 70, condition 1 of the report, where it says no more than 3, I would request the insertion of and only Shepherd's Huts within the dimensions, etc., are included within that condition wording. That really does just nail down the fact that what you are considering here, the design, the size, the shape, is what you are approving on the site, if you were to approve it tonight. So this just shows you the very, they are 3 currently positioned on the site. They have been stored on the site. They're not being lived in when I did my site visit. So, in terms of the overall considerations, main issues to consider are set out in the report, with policies in the local plan providing general support for tourism-related development in the countryside, subject to meeting a number of criteria. The stationing of 3 Shepherd's Huts set back into the site, as I've set out previously, is not considered to result in landscape or visual harm to the locality. Whilst the concerns of the parish council are duly noted regarding flooding, and they're certainly understandable in this location, given the concessions made by the applicant to limit occupation of the units between the 1st of March and the 31st of October only, together with the setting of the 4 levels above predicted flood levels, and adherence to the flood risk assessment and flood warning and evacuation plan, it is considered that the risk to future holiday makers who occupy the Shepherd's Huts is significantly reduced to such an extent that both the sequential and exception tests, which are required to be applied in a case like this regarding flooding, are passed. And also in this context, the Environment Agency raised no objection, subject to the imposition of the conditions listed in number 10 on your papers. So weighing all the matters in the round, planning permission is therefore recommended to be permitted for these particular Shepherd's Huts in their design, location and form, subject to those conditions listed in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right, we have two people wishing to speak to this. Councillor Brown, who we all know and love, from Yalding Parish Council, who has submitted a video, and also I have a statement to be read out on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Edmonds, the applicants. So the video from from Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Just sharing now.
Thank you.
Here we go.
We got it.
Cool, excellent.
Chairman, members, thank you for allowing us to send in this video clip for this evening's meeting. Yalding Parish Council is always extremely concerned regarding any development in a flood zone, and we have already sent some photographs to members outlining the severity of the flooding of that road that gives access to the site this winter through 3 floods in January, March and also before Christmas. In living memory, the worst flood was on the 13th of October 2000. We remember it well, and I for one was not back in my house fully until July of the following year. It is therefore, if members are of a mind to grant planning permission, we do not feel that the site should be occupied other than between the 1st of April and the 30th of September in each year. The other question we have, and which we would like reassurance, is that a shepherd hut is not classified as a caravan. Our concern is that if permission is given for 3 shepherd huts, that these huts could be replaced with mobile homes without any further planning permission. If either of these are going to be implemented, we would ask, is there a possibility of a legal agreement being tied to the site for both its occupancy and what is actually allowed on the site as permitted development, in line with one of the other caravan sites in the floodplain that has been there for a long while? As I say, it is the occupancy, the time scale that we are really concerned about, and the fact that it will just remain for 3 shepherd's huts. Thank you.
Right, and I have a statement from Mr. and Mrs. Edmonds. Good evening, members and committee. This statement on behalf of the applicant, Mr. and Mrs. Edmonds, is brief, but the officer's report is very thorough and sets out the detailed planning considerations in full. The conclusion on the planning merits is that planning consent should be granted subject to conditions. The application comes before members at the request of Yalding Parish Council who have concerns about flood risk. This is understandable given the severity of past flooding events in their parish. However, in this case, the shepherd's huts will be located on flood zone 2 land, and this part of the site has never flooded in the past, even when some other areas of Laddingford were inundated. A flood risk assessment has been carried out, and after detailed scrutiny and up-to-date modelling, the Environment Agency, who are the experts in such matters, are satisfied that there will be no unacceptable flood risk. The use will be limited to between the months of March and October each year, which is the time of year when flooding is least likely. The floor levels of each shepherd's hut will be above the level of worst case predicted future flood levels, even taking account of global warming, and each hut will be tethered and will therefore provide a safe refuge to its occupants, if any. The evacuation plan that will be put in place is comprehensive and effective, but most importantly, on notification of an EA flood alert warning, all future bookings over the period concerned will be cancelled and any existing occupants will be required to vacate immediately. The booking conditions will make this clear and provide suitable financial compensation. If a flood event occurs in the area, the units will have been vacated at the earliest stage. These and other precautions set out in the evacuation plan will ensure that any flood risk is managed and the safety of occupants assured. Mr. and Mrs. Edmonds have lived in the locality for 51 years and the land has been in the ownership of their family since 1965. They wish to establish a small-scale business to provide interest and income in their retirement and to assist with the costs of maintaining the land. Members are respectfully requested to support them and accept the recommendation of their officers to grant planning permission for this modest proposal. And that is a statement on behalf of the applicants. May I ask Mr. Bailey, in terms of the second issue raised by the parish council, in other words, ensuring that the Shepherd's Huts remain Shepherd's Huts, in light of the legal decision which you referred to and which I'm familiar with in relation to the design, is that matter effectively covered by the design condition? Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, with my additional additions of the two words "and only Shepherd's Huts" to condition 1, I do feel that covers that matter, which says no more than three, and only Shepherd's Huts within the dimensions, design and colour as set out on the approved plans, etc., shall be stationed on the site at any time. I do think that covers that case law decision.
Thank you. So the second point of the parish council can and has been accommodated. Right. Right. Do I see Councillor Mumford? Councillor Mumford?
I just sent that emoji as Mr. Bailey spoke. My concern was they're not Shepherd's Huts. What they are is holiday lets, very much influenced by the design of a Shepherd's Hut.
Well, point taken.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to bring up. But Mr. Bailey has said that they have to be to the design that has been put in, so I'm quite happy with that. It was calling them Shepherd's Huts, which they're not.
Yeah, good point. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood, I see you indicated, are you?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, a couple of things. I when I looked at this site, because professionally I spent a lot of time in Yalding, including in March and October. So I was, just this year, for example, we evacuated Little Venice in March. So I don't think you're out of the woods when it comes to flood risk on the confluence here at that time. So I really do wonder about the siting as to why the holiday accommodation is being located where it is when there is other land in the applicant's ownership where there is less vulnerability, not just in terms of property and anybody who's staying in the accommodation, but also in terms of those who have to evacuate and have to make sure that the properties are empty, where I think there is an issue. So that was a question around to Mr. Bailey as to whether there was any negotiation around the siting and to why they are where they are proposed to go. Second point was, having looked at the site, there's been clearly a lot of recent vegetation removal on the site in advance of this planning application. If it had been after the planning application, there would have been environmental surveys and so on as to what was going on and what the risks were. Which brings me on to my third point, which is around environmental mitigation, around introducing disturbance into a sensitive riverside zone, again, which comes into the siting of where the huts are going to go or accommodation is going to go. I've had a look at the landscape plan, but essentially it's talking about gapping up some hedges and managing the woodland that doesn't really look like it needs managing to me, that's already there. What I would have liked was overcoming some of the fragmentation. That when you're on site, there's lots of clumps of trees and then there's lots of kind of mown grass in between. If you were to have contiguous landscaping, it would be far better for landscape and biodiversity. So I do wonder, if we do approve this scheme tonight, whether there is any scope to revisit the principles of the landscaping scheme to do just that, to get more contiguous areas of tree cover by the river, which I think actually would mitigate some of your flood risk as well.
Okay, Mr. Bailey. I think Councillor Harwood has asked a quite valid question that might address two of the issues. Could you come in on that now?
Yeah, I certainly can. It might be easier to, if I show you on a desktop the flooding areas, then you can actually see. So you can see the desktop here. This is taken from our constraints.
Well, actually, I can't, James. Actually, it hasn't come up.
Oh, hasn't it? Okay, hold on. Right. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that now?
Yeah, got it now. Yeah.
Okay, right. So this is the site with the whole of the area in the Zone 2 flood. This then puts it into a Zone 3 layer. So this is where I'm just trying to, if I just let it load up, it will then flash up in terms of, and it will show you the pockets that I think Councillor Harwood is referring to, I hope. It looks like I've got a slow system. It worked perfectly well earlier. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, you can see there, those are the pockets effectively. So the dark blue is the Zone 3 flood risk area, and then you've got the pockets of the Zone 2 area. So in terms of asking the question, obviously if you moved those Shepherd-esque, I think I shall call them, from Councillor Mumford's comments, Shepherd-esque, if you move them closer, then the visual impact does become greater. I'm not saying I think they are appropriate in their context, but this part of the site, as you can see from this Google Earth extract, this is the area effectively that is the Zone 2 pocket, and then it extends roughly up there. That then becomes a lot more visible. So in terms of context of the site, the negotiation, because obviously you'll set out in the report, the EA did originally object to this application. What then took account of the discussion was actually where the line of the historic flooding events occurred, and that was shown by that green line that I previously showed you in the presentation, and that is actually outside of the location where the current shepherd's huts are proposed to be located. So it was considered, but the discussion was with the EA is actually they didn't necessarily have the objection per se to the location. Their objection was having an unrestricted, potentially 12-month use of that site over the winter period. So effectively where we took the discussions from negotiation is looking at imposing in effect a spring, late summer occupation of the site to try to reduce the flood risk on the site. And that's effectively where we got to the position as it was.
And you're happy that those are the right months rather than the ones proposed by Yalding Parish Council, which are slightly more restrictive?
Yeah, those were the ones that we took quite a lot of discussion. This has taken quite a few number of months to come through to you, because the EA weren't going to sort of budge on their position, but they did come up with, they're the ones that have suggested those dates. It wasn't me putting a date, I came up with a general restrict. So they've come up with those dates, and also I think I do accept the evidence that's been put forward, but those are the dates that the Environment Agency feel are acceptable and they're the ones that they put forward to me, and I've encapsulated in condition 10. And there is a balance to be struck, I accept. It's balance about the tourism economy and the income and making it viable vis-a-vis the impact of flood risk against new occupants. But bearing that in mind, members, you've also got those month restrictions. You've got a flood warning and evacuation plan, which sets out sort of quite a detailed assessment.
Right. Before we leave the subject, James, Tony has proposed that we put in some additional landscaping, which also might have some beneficial impact on the flooding, just to be on the safe side. Forgive me, but I don't think you addressed that.
No. Condition 8, page 71. Certainly, I think that could be added to the list. On the basis of condition 8, we could put. I mean, Tony was talking about fragmentation to a continuous landscaping boundary, mainly along this part of the boundary, which is the western boundary of the site here, where it is a lot clearer on site now than when this aerial photograph obviously shows. So I'm assuming Councillor Harwood is referring to this continuation around here.
Let's ask him, as he wanted to come back briefly, Councillor Harwood. What exactly would you like to see in terms of landscape?
It is. It's the western edge where I'd like it pretty much like it's shown in the aerial, but it's not now. It's got lots of holes punched in it, and there's some little standalone groups of vegetation. So yes, I think if we could ensure the landscaping parameters do that and almost put it back to what it was, I think that would be beneficial from a number of perspectives. I would like to come back a little bit on these dates, though. I mean, as was mentioned, in 2020 we had flooding in March, and certainly in October 2000 this area did flood, and the issue around flood warnings is erroneous to a certain point. I have been in Yalding with water several meters high, telling the Environment Agency it's flooding with no flood warning issued, and they are saying, is it flooding then? So I think that there is an issue here around telemetry and so on, doesn't always do the job. And the other risk we have on this area around the confluence is if we do have any failure or breach of the Lye barrier, the water can move in very, very quickly, and that does not give you time to have flood warnings and so on. So I am a little troubled by the March and October. I would say if it were the end of September or the beginning of April, I think that will get you out of the woods. However, I do have some concerns, or even if it were the middle of March or the middle of October. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Councillor Atkinson, you've been very patient. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was trying to get my mic unmuted. Yes, I mean, I think this is a good proposal, actually, but I just want to amend maybe a couple of the conditions. I mean, condition 2, I don't think is 100% clear. I mean, so what I would do is I'd probably put a full stop after purposes only, then have a new sentence: such use shall be restricted to the period between 1 March and 31st October in any year, etc., etc. So that's a minor change. But then condition 3, it says, and the land shall be restored to its condition before the development took place. Well, if you look at paragraph 6.31, it says that it's currently semi-improved grassland. I wouldn't have thought that's what we really want. I mean, surely the best thing to do is just to condition that the hard standings are removed rather than reverting to that type of grassland. And finally, condition 6, maybe we should consider having bug hotels installed as well. Thank you.
I'm sure TripAdvisor would welcome them. Mr. Bailey, I'll come back. I'll ask your comments on that in a minute, but I'm going to take Councillor Perry first.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I wanted to come back to the point that Councillor Harwood made, because I share his concerns. I live in an area which floods, so, and I know that March is quite I dare say popular, but it does flood in March quite a bit in my area. I've never been flooded, but I know that the area I live in does flood, and often March is a flooding area. And I would very much like this to be, I'm not against the proposal, don't get me wrong, but I would like it amended to be 1st of April to the 30th of September. I think that would be safer. I'm very nervous of approving anything in March, quite frankly. And the Environment Agency, God bless their cotton socks, they don't always get these things right. I mean, this is quite it's an art rather than a science, a lot of this, and I think we need to understand that. So I would like to amend this to the 1st of April to the 30th of September. I think we'd be a lot safer doing that. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
Well, I haven't asked. I've only just put it forward.
I'm asking the committee. Is it seconded?
Sorry, Troy.
I will second it.
And do you wish to speak now, Councillor?
No, because that was exactly the point I was going to make anyway, and I think Councillor Perry has made it very well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapeltay. Any further comments from members?
Only presumably the motion will include the tweaking the landscaping condition to re-establish that western belt of shrubs.
Yes, Councillor Perry, I'm sure that you will take on board that and the, shall we say, drafting amendments proposed by
yes, I'm
Councillor
happy with all the points that Councillor Harwood made. I think they were very well made, and I just wanted to add this point, about the 1st of April to the 3rd of September, which I think would be better.
And what about, I think, what about the drafting amendments effectively?
Yeah, the drafting
by
amendments.
Councillor Atkinson.
Yes, I'm happy with what Councillor Atkinson's put forward.
Okay, and Mr. Bailey, would you care to come back on that? Because I think it's fairly clear what's been suggested.
Yeah, I can see where members are going. With regard to the condition 2 drafting, that condition actually survived a High Court challenge, which was all part of the challenge, and the High Court judge turned around and said the wording of that condition is unimpeachable. So I would recommend that we stick to that, but obviously change, if members are going to change the 1st of April to 30th of September. With regard to, I can see Councillor Atkinson's point with regard to condition 3, why, if they're going to improve the grassland, why return it back to what it was? So we could just strike out and the land restored to its condition before the development took place. I would agree. I think that's sensible. With regard to condition 6, the Bug Hotel, that could be incorporated. And yes, obviously Councillor Harwood's request on condition 8. On the western boundary, a contiguous landscaping scheme. I would just advise members again my request for those 2 additional words on condition 1. So yes, I would agree with what members have suggested. I do see members want to take it to the 1st of April. As long as members feel that meets the 6 tests, then that's relevant. I suppose, if the applicant were to challenge that on appeal, we would have to put the evidence of what the parish council have suggested, because obviously we'd be going against what the Environment Agency have suggested. I have to point that out because the Environment Agency, we're taking 2 months off that in effect. But as long as members are aware of that and they feel it meets the tests, then that's what we would have to do.
I think that is the view of members, unless I hear anyone speaking against that proposition. I am going to proceed to...
I think, Chairman, that the parish council, and I believe the councillors can evidence flooding events within the timescale, which is why we inform this timescale. And I think the other issue, which is a concern, is around dam inundation, kind of dam breach, and that actually is not an Environment Agency, that is a Kent County Council responsibility. But again, that there is mapping in place for dam inundation, dam failure inundation, which backs up, I think, the argument that we're talking about here.
Okay, well, I think that's clear where we're going. Mr. Bailey, I think that answers your question. Is everyone clear on what the proposition that's been moved and seconded now is? Good. In that case, Mr. O'Connell.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just check the seconder, please?
Yes, Councillor Chapel-Tay.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. O'Connell, please.
Thank you, Chairman.
Just note, Councillor Wilby has left the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Brindle.
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
4.
Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Eaves.
4.
Councillor Harwood.
4.
Councillor Kimmins.
4.
Councillor Munford.
4.
Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
4.
Councillor Perry.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
Councillor Vizard.
4.
Councillor Councillor Wilby's not here, as you told me.
Thank you. Am I correct in assuming that Mrs. Snoot, that was unanimous?
That's unanimous. 12 in favour, none against.
My goodness me, we're doing well today, aren't we, on the unity of this committee? Right, move to the final application, which is Lock Meadow Leisure Complex. As the council has something of an interest in this, I assume this will have to be introduced. Mr. Reynolds?
Sorry, yep, just presenting.
Yep.
Right, thank you, Chair. This application site is the Lock Meadow Leisure Complex in the town centre. As you say, the applicant is Maidstone Borough Council. Just a bit of background, the council, since taking on the leasehold of the site, has undertaken a review of the premises to improve its attractiveness to attract visitors to the site. And the proposal is minor alterations to the external elevations of the building, which involves the cladding of the blue circular columns in PPC aluminium, cladding of the columns above the car park arches, the replacement of the car park railings, and the removal of the car park entrance gate and the covered walkway structure on the southern boundary of the site. In terms of the site location plan, the building is obviously this big one in the middle of the site. The front entrance is on the northern elevation onto Barkish Road, and the car park entrance is here on the west of the site. The covered walkway to be demolished is also on the southern boundary here, adjacent to the River Medway towpath. This is the existing front elevation, which was approved under the 2016 plan permission and implemented. And just adjacent next to it, you can see the circular columns that will be clad under this application. This is the car park entrance gates on the west of the site, which are to be removed. As set out in the report, these can be removed under permitted development, and planning permission is not required for this element of the proposal. This is the existing rear elevation of the building, and this is the walkway to the southern boundary, which is to be removed as well. It's worth noting that no trees are to be removed as part of this application. Turning now to the plans, this shows the existing front elevation, and this one shows the proposed front elevation just to tie in the 2016 permission and the cladding to be submitted under this application. And this is the rear elevation of the building as proposed. It's worth noting that in terms of policy, the external alterations are considered to be acceptable and in accordance with policy DM1 of the local plan. Policy DM1 also does require proposals to create a safe and secure environment. So in terms of the consultee comments, whilst there's been general support for the elevation changes to the building, concern has been raised by local residents with the removal of the gates at the car park entrance, and that this could lead to antisocial behaviour with cars using the car park in late hours. As I mentioned earlier, this doesn't require planning permission to remove them in any case, but the applicant has provided security details for the site, which set out at present the gates are not currently closed anyway due to the staggered closing times of the cinema, and they haven't been closed for a long time. They also allow local residents to park on the site free overnight, and access is also required to lockups on the west of the site. In terms of the on-site security that has been put in place by the applicant, they state that the site is covered by 52 CCTV cameras, and the site now also has 24 hours a day on-site security. The applicant is also committed to reviewing on-site security measures should any issues arise in future with regard to the use of the car park. And as the leaseholder of the site, it's obviously under the council's control to implement measures should anything happen as well. So in conclusion, the proposal is considered to enhance the visual appearance of the building and is in accordance with the local plan policies. Adequate measures are considered to be in place to deal with on-site security and disturbance issues should they arise, and the proposal is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, this is your ward, although it affects mine too. Do you wish to kick off?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I can't really add much to what Mr. Reynolds' report said, except to say that I actually had a virtual meeting with Alexa Kirsten-Woods, who's the new manager of the Lock Meadow Centre, along with Councillor Harper in June. We did raise concerns about proposed lighting and possibly light pollution, but were reassured later the same day that the lights will be LEDs, so we'll be using less energy and last longer than traditional lighting. Apparently the lux level will be less than ordinary street lamps, so will not add to the light pollution in the area. Also pleased to see the biodiversity improvements, including bee bricks. Looks like I've had an influence at last. The removal of the cow shed is good because that will open up the site. Historically, it was meant to be for art displays, but that never happened. I mean, it sort of
happened once.
Yeah, it happened once, did it? I don't remember that, but I mean, it looks a bit like they're trying to copy the Kapellbrücke in Lucerne, if anyone knows that, but failed miserably. So to see that moves. Now, let's go on to say this is only phase one of the improvements. For phase two, Councillor Harper and I suggested including a green wall, which the architect felt would be an amazing addition. It would give a really good impact, almost like a reflection of the riverbank on the building. So we definitely need to see this when phase two comes to committee. The only alteration I'd like to make to the conditions is the one requested by our own environmental health team in para 6.13, EV charging points. I mean, earlier on in the meeting we said we really should be going for 100%. I know we don't theoretically need to on this one, but as I've said on previous applications, we as the planning authority need to be setting a good example to other property owners and developers. So I think we should be going for some sort of element of EV charging points. So I'd like that added as a further condition, preferably 100%, but 50% I guess will do. So that's all I have to say. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, yes, you refer to a second stage, and that is, and some of the points there. I would have to say that I have had some representations, and councillors and officers will realise that over the years, the College Avenue Residents Association has not always been fully on the same page as Lock Meadow. They have actually said that they're in favour of the facade improvements. They did ask whether, they understood that no trees were being removed, but they did actually ask us going forward whether in this phase or the next phase there could be consideration of actually adding a few, which may be something we need to note and pick up in the second phase. As we go forward. But most of the representations I have had, including from the leader of the council, are about the removal of the security gate. I do understand that over the last couple of years things have dramatically improved, because in the past the operators of the centres confined their use of the CCTV to the building and didn't control the car park at all. That has dramatically improved. However, whilst the gates probably do need to remain open, I would feel more comfortable if there were actually the ability to have a gate that would close, because there has been a record over the years of some considerable difficulty here in the past. And it would actually be the easiest method of controlling it, should that be necessary. I do support what you're saying, Councillor, about EV charging points. Anyone else wishing to speak at this point? Councillor Vizard, I think that is. Councillor Vizard?
Certainly is, Mr. Chairman. I can only echo your concerns about removal of the gates completely. I realise it's permitted permissions, and I understand the local residents' concerns, but through the period of where we've been over this last 3 months with using the Maidstone hub from that area, there has been a period of time where we've had to keep the gates locked because of antisocial activities that have been there. So I would also be reluctant to the agreement of having the gates taken away permanently if they were there as a security point, to be used as a security point at some stage if it were required. I'd be much happier with that position to be, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Chapeltay, then I'll ask the officer to come back. Councillor Chapeltay, please.
I actually indicated that I wish to speak before Councillor Vizard.
For some reason, you were slightly late in coming through on the IM, Karen. Sorry.
Not seeing the messages, which is what my first question.
Yeah.
You've got it now. Okay,
yeah, I had it, but you just came through after him for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, carry on now.
Main thing is you can actually see. My question was also about the gates, because that seems to be the only thing on which there's much question. So if removing them is not a planning matter, presumably putting them back on, that wouldn't require planning permission either, or would it? Because that's a positive act as opposed to a negative act. So, Mr. Reynolds.
Yes, Mr. Reynolds, that's your cue, I think. Hello, Mr. Reynolds. Are you with us?
He's dropped out.
Okay, well, I'll give him
a minute. Chairman.
I'll give him a minute or two and see if there are any other councillors wishing to speak.
I think he may be back now.
Sorry, I'm back. I pressed the wrong button.
It happens all the time with this system.
Sorry.
Adam, carry on, please.
First point of lighting. Yes, thank you for picking up on that. Lighting is proposed as well. The principle of this is accepted. It can provide a positive contribution to entertainment complexes like this. There is a condition requiring prior to any installation of the lighting under condition, condition 3, that we will have illumination levels predicting lighting contours and all hours of use prior to the installation. So that would cover that. With regard to the EV, this is an existing entertainment complex, which obviously is under the control of the council to install EV should they want to outside of the planning system. There is no additional parking going in as part of this development. There's no change of use, so I would be mindful of that. I think the applicant would be happy to put in EV, but I wonder if this could be done outside of the planning system in terms of not requiring a condition and for them to do it anyway.
Yes, Mr. Mackey, you wanted to address that point. I'll bring you on that later after Adam's finished.
For the gates, as set out in paragraph 6.09 of the report, as this isn't a conservation area or listed building, they can be removed without planning permission. Gates could also be installed or up to the height of 1 metre adjacent to the highway under permitted development as well. So that could involve possibly a swing gate that opens out into the back and then back across when required.
Can I come back on that then? Because my understanding
yes, you can. Yeah.
Is that they are above 1 metre. So I think, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is planning permission is not required to remove them, but if we then wish to replace them later, we would require planning permission. Is that correct?
For anything over 1 metre, yes, adjacent to the highway.
No permission required to remove, but we would need permission to put them back, in which case it would be more sensible to leave them and leave them open.
I agree, Councillor. I would leave them there in that situation.
I think yes, up to members if they wish that. But as I say, they could remove it anyway without planning permission. They could put in some form of gate which is under 1 metre, where it's a swing gate that just opens out as a mechanism to address that should it come up. Or if they wanted other mechanisms to come in, it could go under one of the future planning applications for the changes if it's going to be over 1 metre high.
Well, I would propose, if it's all right with members, that we add an informative saying that however it is addressed, the retention of a secure gating mechanism is needed. And there are a number of ways to do that. I'm not trying to guide how it's done, but I'm just saying an informative saying in the view of members, the ability to have a secure gate should be retained.
I'd second that.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, of course, Councillor Brindle. As it's on this point, as you indicated.
We're talking about the gates at the car park entrance.
Yes.
Is that to keep cars specifically out? Because I'm looking now on Google Earth at the pedestrian gate that leads from the car park to the main centre on Hart Street entrance. Now, if the proposal is to take those gates and the railings down, if we're keeping the place secure, perhaps by keeping the front gates, the main gates there is another exit entrance which will be useful for anyone up to no good at that end.
If I can possibly assist Councillor Brindle, that the only real issue there has been purely noise and disturbance from motor vehicles. There hasn't been any other issue, but the issue there does impact now, since the development, it impacts on some of Councillor Atkinson's residents, but historically it impacted mostly on the almshouses in College Avenue, where it's a rather elderly and frail population.
Yes.
So it was that issue. So
it is just
that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mackey, I think you wanted to raise a point on this both on this and possibly on the EV.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was specifically regarding how we would apply a percentage of EV charging to a destination. It is good practice to achieve the highest possible level of EV charging at the source, i.e. where people live, potentially where they work. But for a destination, you wouldn't take the same approach of saying 25 or 50 or 100% car parking spaces. You would normally expect a reasonable percentage that would increase over time in order to reflect changing ownerships. But in a situation like this, it wouldn't be advisable to suggest a figure like 50% or more, because it simply wouldn't be achievable or realistic. But it's something that, as I'm about to order an electric car myself, I'm keen to see provision everywhere. But I think members just need to be cautious in not being onerous. A condition requiring a high level of EV charging wouldn't meet any of the tests about making what is before you acceptable. But an informative, encouraging our colleagues to pursue a strategy for EV charging at this site would certainly be helpful.
So that would make 2 informatives to be added to the recommendation. Okay, anything else, members?
Chairman?
Yes.
Can I add something in a slightly different capacity in terms of the fact we're developing the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan to come to Policy and Resources in due course, and Councillor Harwood is the chairman of the working group. You could do a reference from the Planning Committee to Policy and Resources with the with the suggestions for the site.
You must be psychic, Mr. O'Connell. Yes, I will be doing that once we determine the application, because that will need to be a separate motion. Thank you very much. Anyone on this particular planning decision before we move to Mr. O'Connell's very bright idea? No, in that case, is everyone clear what the recommendation would be? It's as on the papers with the addition of 2 informatives.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. O'Connell, if you'd take the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Brindle.
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay.
4.
Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Eaves.
4.
Councillor Harwood.
4.
Councillor Kimmins.
4.
Councillor Mumford.
4.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
4.
Councillor Perry.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
And Councillor Vizard.
4.
Thank you very much. Was that unanimous, Mrs. Snook?
It was, Chairman. 12 for, none against.
Thank you. Now, turning to the very worthwhile suggestion by Mr. O'Connell, I would like to propose that this committee make a reference to the Climate Change Working Group in relation to securing a high level of sustainability, in particular in relation to electric charging points in this building. Is that seconded?
I'll second it.
If I may, Chairman, even though this is a reference to myself, I think
you can't really second it.
No, but I'm wondering whether what we need to talk about is ensuring that this renovation is an exemplar in terms of environmental sustainability, because I think you should also factor in things like bringing in native trees along the riverside where there will be some potential, as well as potentially retrofitting of the building with, I don't know, air source heat pump or something, so that it's not just about EV.
Well, I didn't. I don't think my wording suggested it was just that. I think that was just a particular example, but I'm happy to adopt that wording. That would also pick up the point I referenced earlier from the College Avenue Residents Association about additional planting along the river line, wouldn't it? So, which would be helpful. Is that seconded on the wording proposed by Tony?
Yep. Seconded.
I'll second it, yep.
All those in favour, please indicate alphabetically. Mr. O'Connell?
Well, unless anybody's dissenting, you could just check for some dissent.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. Anyone against? No, in that case, it's agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you for your help on this item, Mr. O'Connell. Much appreciated. Right, our final item this evening, agenda item 17, appeal decisions. Mr. Bailey, this is just a report for noting or any questions that people have.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I haven't really got anything to add. There's only one item on the list. I'll let members decide for themselves. I was just going to raise the issue of the High Court decision that we had, and just, if members would like me to discuss that very slightly in the implications of it.
Oh, yes, I think it would be useful given the discussion we had earlier this evening.
Yeah, so just very briefly, members, I won't take a lot of time to do it. Obviously, this case related to a case that came before you, actually, which was the case Oakhurst, Starbridge Lane, which was for 20 holiday lodges.
Oh, yeah.
So this case was JR'd on the basis that effectively there'd been an error of law in terms of advising members that in terms of consideration whether you could consider the specific design elements of the caravans on the site. You obviously said that you shouldn't be because they're covered under the Caravan and Licensing Act. Mr. Justice Holgate disagreed and said as a matter of law that you are entitled and you should consider the specific design of caravans. I mean, that's the key judgment that this came out. He's plugged a loophole, not a loophole, I should say. He's plugged a legal matter that hadn't been part of any advocacy before. So it is now established that decision makers should consider design of principally chattels, I might call them, which have a degree of permanency, and any other features on land which have a degree of permanency. So the judge effectively said that you shouldn't really be considering design on touring caravans because they come and go on a regular basis, but with relation to statics, which have a far more permanent attachment to the land, then it's right and proper that design should be something that you should consider. And if members considered that it was appropriate to impose conditions such as cladding of those caravans, etc., with whatever would be appropriate, then that should form part of your consideration. If you didn't think it was necessary, then obviously you wouldn't need to condition it on that basis. But as long as you assessed the principles of the design of the caravans in your assessment, then that was acceptable. Obviously, I did say earlier that the case also considered that condition particular wording, which was found unimpeachable by the judge, and that was found to be perfectly acceptable, hence why I said what I said earlier on our previous decision. And that's just a brief update. So unfortunately, it's a judgment that we lost. And obviously we had to pay the costs of the party taking that to the High Court, but it does actually now confirm a consideration that is now enshrined in law. That's my update, Chairman.
To be honest, there are very few occasions when I'm most glad to have lost a case, because it is quite useful actually in some ways going forward. Any questions or comments?
I can send the case around, Chairman, if you wish.
Yes, I think members would like to see it. It's a very important consideration, and although we lost this case, it could be quite useful to us going forward. So I'm not too upset. And it's always nice to be in the history books, even for which we are now on this one. So thank you very much, everyone. Any further questions? You'll be able to see it for yourselves shortly when it goes around.
Chairman, may I just come in? Obviously, the High Court has quashed that permission, so I'm assuming that Mr. Bailey will be bringing this back to committee for you to reconsider it in due course.
I will do in due course, Ms. Parks.
We look forward to it. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you, officers, members, for your and indeed members of the public who've participated one way or another in this meeting, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, officers.